Now on to the program. I want to introduce Jim Lane, who is the editor and publisher of Biofuels Digest. He is chairman of the American Biofuels Council. He also participates on the UN Roundtable on Sustainable Biofuels. He is an Australian and a lifelong member of the Sierra Club. And it turns out that biofuels is the perfect expression of his passion for social justice. So let's welcome Jim Lane.
Thank you. Now we're going to have to do a little, let's make sure we get my little presentation up here. How are you doing, everyone? Doing great? We're going to have a great evening tonight, and I'm just really looking forward to this for a long time. I don't get out to Silicon Valley very often, so this is terrific to meet you all. Biofuels Digest is available at the everyday low price of free, so which is probably why everyone reads it. So if you don't read it and you'd like to, just give me a card afterwards, and we'll set you up and look forward to doing that. What I want to do before getting into the presentation is kind of just set our expectations about what a bioenergy factory looks like. Because a lot of us, I think, have a different perception. You may have heard about, corn ethanol or, some advanced biofuels. Just remember that you, in fact, are a bioenergy factory. So just think about that for a second. You are a bioenergy factory because you ingest biomass, and you use acids and enzymes to break that into simple sugars, which is what we do in bioenergy, and you turn that into a combination of mechanical and electrical energy, which you do, and then you go out your business in the world. Now, what's great about that is that you're a self-contained system, and it's really terrific. So don't forget, you are in fact a bioenergy factory yourself. The downside is that you run on 8 BTUs, 8 British thermal units per day. That's what your system requires. So it's a very efficient system. But just to put this into context, we're talking about a system where we need to create worldwide 400 quadrillion BTUs of energy every year to power the industrial system that surrounds us. So we have to, when we're thinking about bioenergy, we want to think about a slightly different system. And I just want to introduce you, if we play here. There we go. I want to just introduce you to what a bioenergy system really looks like and feels like up front. I shot this video. I hope this works. I shot this last Friday. What this represents is 4 ounces of waste biomass, what you're about to see. Consider this example. Let's say you went out to Kentucky Fried Chicken and you had a nice little, little single meal. And afterwards, you had a little bit of bone left over, and you had a greasy napkin, and you had a little styrofoam cup, okay? And you threw it in the trash, okay? That's what we currently do with our waste. That's about 4 ounces. And I want to show you what 4 ounces with an advanced bioenergy platform really looks like. This entire burn is 4 ounces of energy. This is like a rocket engine. That's 4 ounces of the future. So that gives you an example of what your waste biomass can do. It's an awesome amount of energy. This actually was done with pyrolysis. We'll be getting into a couple of advanced technologies, but never, just hopefully that sets your mind as to what we're talking about with bioenergy is a wholly different way of dealing with this thing called biomass. And just a note about that 8 BTUs that you use. What I wanted to do is put into context for you how much energy we're going to be creating with these platforms and how much potential we have. I've got a little dot over in the upper left-hand side. That's how much energy it takes to run you. Your body runs on that kind of energy. The only difference here, in that whole gray area, what is that gray area? That's the energy that's consumed around you. That's your air conditioning, that's your car, that's your office. That's the energy system that surrounds you. That's how much energy it takes to run the system that provides you with a lifestyle. That's your footprint. That's your energy footprint. Your personal footprint is that little tiny dot, only there's one little kicker there. If you see there, I actually magnified your dot 500 times so that you could see it. So it gives you a sense of how much energy we consume and how much we have to make just to get through the day. Now, let's also put this into context. Again, we have a little dot up in the upper left-hand side. That is the entire global energy demand. Just imagine that every single person with that huge footprint we just saw, all put together, 6.8 billion people, all contained in that little dot. The entire gray area here represents the global biomass potential. That's actually if we actually took every single arable acre here on Earth and we took our most advanced feedstocks and we grew them out to their max. Now, that's not a practical thing, probably. But as you can see, we actually have the potential to grow 21,000 quadrillion BTUs of energy. We only use 400. So this gives you a sense here of what we're talking about. And you've probably heard about food versus fuel and, gee, why are we making energy out of our food stock because we need it, we got to have it, we're going to have starvation in Africa. I've actually, that little tiny blue slice there, that is our world food supply. That's how much energy we need. That's actually the actual BTU energy in our world food supply. The only trick is I put everybody, just so you could see it, this is not your actual diet. I put everybody on an all-beef diet just to get it big enough. So you're all going to have heart disease here. It's going to be really terrible. But just so you could see it. So that's your all-beef diet, everybody worldwide. And we know, not everybody's on a beef diet all around the world. Although I'm sure Congressman Moran would be very happy if we did so. I'm sure he's got lots of work in that area from his constituents. Global energy demand is that big, huge footprint we were talking about earlier. That's that little green slice. And the big yellow wood piece there that we're not using, that's the underutilization that we have. So what this industry we're going to be talking about today is dealing with how do we more efficiently and effectively use all this capacity that we are not using today. And that's the opportunity that we have. So we're not taking anything. This is not a substitution like, oh, gee, it's food or fuel. We're talking about this 98% that we're not currently utilizing that we could. Let's talk just a couple of metrics before we bring some of the speakers up. And again, just to give you some context, these are our advanced biofuels. This is our projection of how much growth is going to happen in this industry. This is an exploding industry. 6 million gallons of advanced biofuels. And this is biofuels like the type you just saw in the video. This is not made from corn. This is made from waste biomass, advanced feedstocks, advanced processing technologies. 6 million gallons last year we made. This year we're going to make, by the end of the year, we'll have, this is capacity. How much capacity we'll actually have in this worldwide. We'll have 119 million gallons, growing to 1.6 billion in 2013. So this industry is really, really, really taking off. This is actually announced capacity. These guys are in place. They are financed. They are building right now. They're putting steel in the ground in most cases, because by 2013, you pretty much have to be knowing what you're doing to get something done, because it takes a while to get the permitting done. So that's where we're going. But let's put this in context of our U.S. biofuels mandates. This is just here in the United States. Now remember, I put down here on the lower bar there how much advanced biofuels capacity we have globally, and I'm just going to measure it against the mandates we have here in the United States. And you can see that we have a long ways to go. So keep thinking in mind how much biomass we're underutilizing. The opportunities are really limitless. And for those of you looking at the industry, this is a good time to look at it, because as you can see, this is mandated usage. So you can see how much fuel you could make and still find a market for it by law. You don't have to really worry about some of the market constraints that you have in developing other products. But let's put this in the context of our global oil consumption. You can just barely see in the bottom of the screen there in the left-hand columns. That's our advanced biofuel mandate, and that's our biofuel mandate. And then I put this against the global oil consumption. This is how much we're going to have to, we have the opportunity to substitute. So when I say this industry is taking off and we have all this biomass to use and we have limitless opportunity, and these guys are going to explore for you in a few minutes how they're going about that and how they're doing so in a sustainable way, economically as well as socially and environmentally, the opportunities are huge. Why bio as opposed to electrons? Why do we focus on molecules? We talk a lot about electrons too, and I cover electrons. I cover solar and wind, exciting technologies. The opportunities with bio are storage. This is how much watt hours per kilogram that a biosystem can store as opposed to, let's say, a lithium-ion battery. This is lithium-ion battery can store about 700 watt-hours per kilogram of mass. And a biosystem, molecular-based system, can do a huge, huge amount beyond that. So that's really important to consider when we talk about moving energy to where it's needed from where it's made. These are the kind of opportunities we talk about. Anything that's mobile, anything that's big, large scale, or has got to be moved, it's much easier to store with bio. Also, as I mentioned, also mobility. The transmission loss for bioenergy is about 1% when you move it. You get a little bit of leakage, spillage, whatever. The transmission loss with electrons is about 35% in let's say countries that don't have smart grid. It'll be a lot less in the future, but that's a lot of transmission loss. So we have to think about efficiency as well as effectiveness. That's not a wrap on electrons. That's to say that electrons have their place and bio have their place, and both of them are important. Why now? Why are we doing this now? That's a little known fact, actually. If you look at our current usage of oil and you look at our current proved reserves, this is actually from BP, so this is not, some downplayed example here. Our current usage of 1.48 trillion gallons per year, we have 35 years of oil. That's it. Now, of course, we're going to find more, we're going to discover more, we're going to explore more, we're going to find better ways to get it out. But think about that. If we don't, we've got to innovate. We've got to innovate something, because we either have to learn to be better and more effective with our oil reserves and get more out of it or find more of it, or we are going to have to innovate on another platform. The energy justice case, this is one that's talked about a little bit in the industry, so it's a little bit inside speak. But this theory is that a world that is stable politically, a world cannot be stable politically until everybody has the same access to energy as you do. That you can't hold people in India and China and Brazil and Burundi in energy slavery forever, because it creates the hurricane conditions that feed terrorism, for example. If you give everybody the same amount of energy that you enjoy today, we have 7.6 years of oil reserves left. So the time to innovate is now. It's part of what is driving innovation and is driving policy, and for all the right reasons. We have some sustainability challenges. I think these are well known. We'll be exploring these. We have sustainable challenges in terms of our industrial model. We have a lot of commuting going on that's very inefficient in terms of energy. We set up suburbs in the days when energy was cheap. Now energy is expensive. People are commuting 50 miles. That's carbon. That's cost. That may need to change. We also have a scaled system, which is based on cheap energy. We build things far away from the end user markets. P&G and Dow and lots of other companies are making things for the home market far, far away. Maybe they're making them in China, maybe they're making them in the Middle East and they're bringing them here. Very inefficient model for the future, isn't it? And also there's the social cost of the industrial model. Any of you who've traveled to China in the last couple of years and maybe went there 15, 20 years ago, or have been to Africa will know exactly what I'm speaking of. If you've been down to Port Harcourt in Nigeria, it's a tragedy. Slavery's on the rise in Brazil, it's a human tragedy, and you can't see down the street in China. Why? That's because of our energy footprint. Again, we have a couple of models that we've traditionally used, and this is our industrial scale model on the left, where we have a processor in who's drawing raw materials and labor from far, far away and is going to a long end-user market. I would submit to you that an opportunity that we have for the future is a distributed model, and bioenergy gives us that, because you can make bioenergy wherever you are. Doesn't mean that it's the most efficient way to make it, most effective way. Sometimes you do want to move it, but it's an opportunity we have because you don't just have to make it where you can find it. And that allows you to bring everything much closer, and a community that is benefiting by providing its own energy is keeping money in the community. If you think about it, that money that is spent on energy today that leaks out of the community is recirculated into the community. So every dollar you have in the community stays in the community, and you get that multiplying effect that creates more jobs, more green jobs, more income, and it keeps circulating. And everyone here is probably well trained on what happens when you circulate money over a period of time. If it starts leaking out to another community, to another state, to another country, you don't get quite the same effect. We have a couple of horizons we'll be talking about today, and I just want to leave to you 3 ideas which we'll be exploring a little bit. If you're asking yourself, how do I get in? What are some opportunities that might be interesting for me? First of all, we'll be talking about this. We have some great technologists up here today, and they'll tell you a lot about technology innovation, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them because I'm a journalist, not a scientist. And so I learned from them as well. I'm looking forward to hearing about technology innovations. But technology is there to be done all the time because we can get more and better yields using less and less valuable feedstocks. Secondly, scale. We need scale. We talked about this a little bit in the context of the slides before, how much energy we have to make. So we need to think about scale. So lots of infrastructure needed to deliver that and to design that and to engineer that. So lots of opportunities there. And also on the right-hand slide, and I'm sorry this is the right-hand side of the slide, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is process integration. And this is something you might want to think about, is how to integrate technology. This is actually the system by which Kalundborg, Denmark, operates. It's a town on the west coast of Denmark, and they have a whole symbiotic system, and they have every major refinery or factory there is using waste streams that are carefully designed from other providers in the system. So the one guy's waste becomes the other guy's feedstock, and then his waste becomes her feedstock, and her waste becomes someone else's feedstock. It's called a symbiosis. We call it co-location here. It's a wonderful idea, and they practice it every day in Kalundborg, and it works. And they just have a new cellulosic ethanol plant in Kalundborg called Imbicon, which is using waste from a coal-fired power plant. They're using the waste heat from the plant, and then they produce lignin, which is burned in the plant to replace coal. So they're reducing emissions, reducing costs. It's a really nice system. So that's an example of how symbiosis can apply in bioenergy. So those are just a couple of the areas, and we'll be talking a little bit more about with our presenters and our panelists today about how they're approaching and how they're extracting value out of that and what the opportunities are for you. Without further ado, except I have to do a little swap on the computer here, and that may be quite, if you know my computer skills, it's a shocker. So I'm going to invite Jack Oswald up here from Syngest. And Jack is CEO of Syngest, and it's a very exciting company. We've been profiling for some time in Biofuels Digest. Exciting story, not only a little bit on the biofuels, but also in the biofertilizer, bioammonia platform. Very exciting stuff. We've enjoyed tracking that story for some time. He's also one of the selectors of our 50 hottest companies in bioenergy. So I've enjoyed working with him this year on picking good companies, and so he's also a good evaluator of the space. I can attest to that. So Jack. Okay, so you're on this one, right? Yeah, you're on this one. So we're gonna swap this. So I think we have to do it like this. For a guy from Redmond, Washington, which I am, I know nothing about the PC platform. Actually, I'm from Redmond. It was a cow town, actually. Redmond is next to Carnation. If you ever had Carnation milk. And it was actually, the reason that Microsoft is there is because the land was so cheap, because it wasn't even a cow town. It was kind of like the leftover cow town. So when they had extra cows in Carnation, they used to send them over to Redmond. So that's why they're there. So I'm from the cow side of Redmond. Okay.
Looks like this thing lost its power.
Do you need audio?
No. Looks like we'll have to boot up here.
Oh.
So as we're waiting for the slides to come up, so a lot of people ask me, so how did you get into the clean energy business? And I came to a fork in the road and I took it. And so that's how I got here. Famous line from Yogi Berra. So anyway, but realistically, 4 years ago, I was at the TED conference, which I just came back from last week. For those of you who haven't been, I highly recommend, if you can ever find a way to get yourself there, go do it. It expands your mind. It's one of those opportunities to come back enthusiastic about whatever is going on in the world and believe that everything is possible. But Al gave his talk before the movie came out, and it really scared the crap out of me, and enough to get me to change my career, leave what I was doing, and become a clean energy entrepreneur. I'd been an entrepreneur already, but clean energy was not an area that I knew much about. I spent about 18 months educating myself, interviewing every investor that I could find, reading every book I could get my hands on, talking to researchers, engineers, anybody that I could learn from to get a context of what was the definition of clean energy and where might I be able to fit in. Originally, I thought that I would be joining somebody else's company, but I can't help myself, and so I started my own. And so Syngest was born out of sort of the search for a way to find some meaning, in the next phase of my life, which is the one I'm in now, and to try to do something about this climate change and energy problem that we have. And the best way I knew how was to start a company that could scale and eventually make enough clean energy that we could actually move the bar meaningfully in terms of making our world a safer place to live in. Let me figure this out. It's plugged in. So does somebody know how to unlock this computer? Because it's in a locked mode.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
Oh, there.
Whoops. Let me get back up to the beginning. There we go. So you get a little bit of the story about how things got started. And when I looked around at all the different opportunities, I looked at solar, I looked at wind, I looked at geothermal, we looked at biofuels. And when we got into the state of the art in biofuels, which even to this day is, still in production, is corn ethanol and biodiesel, even, a little bit of hubris, I said, well, if that's the state of the art, and I don't know anything about this industry, I think I could even do better than that. So that's what got us down the path of actually looking at biofuels. And the company Syngest is known today as really the bio-ammonia company made from biomass, and as we call it, putting the power of nature to work. But as time has gone on, we've actually become what is really a company that sits at the intersection of energy and agriculture. And I have the fortunate opportunity to be leading the commercialization of a private research lab that has been developing technologies in the clean energy world or in support of it for the last 25 years. So we actually have quite a portfolio of technologies that a small startup normally would not have, and that we can bring to bear. And I'll explain some of those a little bit as we go through here. And one of the things I often like to say about corn ethanol is that the problem with corn ethanol is not the corn, it's the ethanol. And it's actually the way we make it is really the problem. And that by having a product that focuses on the agriculture industry as our primary customer, we've had an opportunity to learn some things and get some insights that I think we wouldn't have gotten if they were just our suppliers of whether it's biomass or other feedstock, and where the markets were purely the energy markets and fuel markets. So you'll see some of that as we go through here, and I think it's an important lesson, and it's important to me because I didn't expect to find some of these things, that as we go through and build out this industry, there may be some hidden gems and opportunities for businesses and to do better with what we have, as Jim was saying, than we might have otherwise thought. And a lot of the estimates about, well, gee, we don't have enough biomass to make enough fuel are based on current snapshots and maybe today's technology, but not understanding what the potential really is. So I was asked to talk about sustainability, and we'll talk about that in the context of some of the learnings of a startup company in the clean energy world. So we'll talk about these things that I put up on the slides, and initially starting with compatibility. So one of the things that, the premises that I learned in my research early on was everyone, at least all the smart ones, at least I thought, said, if you're going to get into clean energy and you're going to get into fuels and biofuels, think about infrastructure, that you've got to fit into the existing fleets, existing infrastructure of whatever product you make. Otherwise, you're just never going to get there from here. You can't boil the ocean. You can't build a new transmission system or a new fuel depot. It's just not going to work. You'll always run into obstacles. So you've got to make something that's completely compatible. And so as a result, we decided to make what is a fuel, but is most commonly known as a fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia. For those who don't know, actually, how many people here either grew up or know people who grew up on a farm and know much about farming? A surprisingly large number of people, actually. I usually get almost none. It turns out that nitrogen fertilizer all starts out in life as anhydrous ammonia, NH3, and all the fertilizers that we see used in the marketplace and even things you use in your own garden are derived from this molecule. And today, it's almost all made from fossil fuels, which is also, we all compost around here, so we think maybe that's where it comes from. Natural gas, coal, petroleum, those are the sources for our industrial food system. And when I recognized that and learned that, I also realized that it takes up 3% of world energy goes into making this stuff. So the fact that we are as fat as we are in this country is all because we actually make enough of this stuff to make that possible. So when I looked at that and I said, well, if there's one technology and one approach that we can use, which is biomass with a conversion technology, we can lop off 3% of world energy, that's where I want to focus. And then we started looking at the economics, and we figured out that if you take a ton of biomass and you look at it as a commodity, you can actually convert that into nitrogen fertilizer and sell it for a larger margin per ton produced than anything else that you can make in the market. Fuels can't compete, nothing else can compete, maybe a few small specialty chemicals, but in terms of large volumes, this is the place to be. So that's why we started down this path. It was purely motivated by I wanted to make enough of a difference and be able to build the most successful company we can so it'll attract capital, we can make the most impact. And so that was the other thing that I learned as we went through this was that there's no compromise. I can build a company that both helps save our planet and makes our world a better place and become extraordinarily rich at the same time. Can't lose. The other thing that's interesting about anhydrous ammonia is that there's already 3,000 miles of pipeline, mostly in the Midwest, that distributes this stuff, and a whole series of other very safe methods of moving it around. Most people aren't familiar with this because we don't spend time in this community. And so it's already, immediate market that we can just plug right into. And plus, as Jim was saying, this is a local model. Take in local biomass, you process it, you make a product that you sell locally. Except in rare instances, this stuff will never go more than 50 miles from the site that it comes in from or goes out from. So it's a very interesting opportunity in that regard. Next one, unique proposition. So this has both a good side and a bad side, and I'll talk about the good side first. So being unique is great because we got a story to tell that nobody's heard before. Of course, that's the other side of it, which is nobody's heard it before. And which means you have a lot of education to do, and in the markets where you're raising capital, it can be a bit of a challenge. But it also gives you an opportunity when going out to build coalitions in the communities where you want to build these facilities. We have something that we can tell that makes us interesting and valuable to the states, the local economies, the politicians, and everybody else, so that they help us make it happen. They don't see us as interlopers coming in, mining their natural resources and taking all the profits away. They see this as something that becomes part of their community. And it doesn't matter whether you're making a fuel that you ship out of the area. It's important to realize that you are becoming part of a community, a 20-year project, and that you have to really integrate yourself and build those relationships. So, just very quickly, the benefits here is that this product is expensive. It's one of the most expensive inputs into agriculture. The prices have been all over the place because they fluctuate with the markets of energy, because 90% of the cost is the cost of the energy that goes into it. Because it's distributed, but it's not exactly in the middle of the field, they get supply disruptions. We're now actually importing more than 60% of it, and that scares a lot of people because our food supply is dependent upon it. And then there's the fossil fuel issue, so the carbon footprint of a typical corn crop is 50% supplied by the nitrogen fertilizer that it uses. So, and farmers are starting to recognize that the carbon accounting world is coming. And also that some of the suppliers are not necessarily our friends. So people recognize that there are political realities around this as well. But then the story that gets people's attention is rolling thunder of construction jobs. So, big projects, they're $100, $150 million. We're, bringing in new permanent jobs and communities. I can't send these to any other country. You can't operate this remotely. I keep asking if I can do it on my iPhone. They say, no, you're not allowed. And then the feedstock supply, and this is the hidden gem in all these things. Although there's been a lot of talk about taking people's waste streams, getting paid to take them, and then use them to make products. Reality is, this industry matures, we will all be paying for our biomass inputs, and our budget is around $7 million a year per facility. You add that up over time, that's new money that's staying in that community. And those who do know macroeconomics, that the velocity of money is enormous. this is balance of trade per state and for the country. People get it. They realize, wow, the opportunity in biofuels is bigger than I realized. And it's pretty substantial. And that's just one facility in our case. Do 10 of them in the state, starts adding up, it becomes real money. And the other thing is that when you're running a state, you're governor of Ohio or Iowa, which two folks we spend a lot of time with. You realize that you have two really important industries. You got agriculture, and you've got other biofuels that use the crops as inputs. And so when you have a nitrogen fertilizer issue potentially, and you can literally grow it yourself, you end up with a situation where you've now shored up an industry input that is really critical. Yeah. And then the economic opportunities that go along with that, including low-carbon crops and ultimately low-carbon fuels, which becomes really important. Competition. So in this case, it's a very focused market, as you can see. Everybody is strategically placed so that the terminals don't have a lot of competition among the different companies. And so as a result, the farmers get the short end of the stick. The good news is that for a startup, this is actually a great place to start because the real distributors are farming co-ops. And those people really want to get involved in a new opportunity for business to stabilize their own pricing and to control their destiny. They're very happy to get unscrewed by these guys. The next thing is knowing your market, and I'll just share a couple of things that we learned along the way. Most of this will lead into the next piece, which is some of the opportunities, but the first thing was some new definitions of the English language. So I learned that in the Midwest, you visit, which is the definition for meeting, preferably in person, or a phone call if you have to do it. You got to realize that in Iowa, where every 4 years everybody wants to be president comes to your door several times, it sort of seems just appropriate that anybody would. Anhydrous is the short term for anhydrous ammonia, interestingly enough. So if you say ammonia, they know you're from out of town. And the 20 questions game, really means, gee, what's a guy from San Francisco doing out here? And then two of my favorites, the definition of a vegetable, it's something that food eats. And those who know PETA stands for people eating tasty animals. So these are a few things we learned along the way. So the last thing is that in these industries, it's good to be more than just a one-trick pony. Having at least a second trick is important. And so really being able to talk about a technology platform, and although there's a lot going on this slide, ultimately what we're doing with our technology platform at Syngest is gasification. So we're taking biomass, we put it inside a very hot pressurized reactor, and everything goes poof. That's my best imitation of gasification. And what we're making is synthesis gas or syngas, carbon monoxide and hydrogen. From there, we can go anywhere on what we like to refer to as our wheel of fortune. And depending on how we manipulate the gas and use catalysts, we can make every one of these things. However, as I said before, the most valuable thing we can make is anhydrous ammonia, or anhydrous, excuse me. But there are a couple of other interesting opportunities, and one of the next things that's on our list is to make methanol, which is used in the biodiesel industry and also for fuel cells. And then finally, dimethyl ether, which hasn't really hit the scenes here in the US, but is a direct replacement for propane or can be used as a diesel fuel as well. So there's some interesting opportunities. The other thing that we learned as we went through and learned about the current biofuels market, and everybody has a problem with corn ethanol, and they shouldn't in the current day and age the way we do it. But you got to remember the history. Corn ethanol and biodiesel, as we know it from food crops, really started out as a farm support program. So the idea was to have a certain minimum volume of fuel that's produced from these crops that allow us to basically have a minimum price for farmers. And then we had feature creep, and it became an energy program. We've all seen this before in software, but now it's happened in bioenergy. And the challenge is that we're now trying to make something that was not designed to be an energy program, be an energy program. But that doesn't mean it can't be, because it turns out that if you do some smart things, and this is some of the things that we've been taught along the way, such as today, when we make corn ethanol, we grind up the corn. It's the equivalent of taking an entire animal like a cow and making hamburger out of the whole thing instead of butchering it. But if you're smart and you butcher the corn and you separate it into its 3 constituent components, you can make fuel out of the starch. And guess what? We make fuel instead of more high fructose corn syrup, which is, in my view, a much better alternative. We also then have the germ left over, which has the real valuable food parts in it, the mazola equivalent, effectively, the oil, and protein. And if you do it right, we can eat it, or we can feed it to animals, whatever it is we want to do with it. And then we've got a whole bunch of biomass left over that we can use to gasify and make other fuels. And so this is the model of the biorefinery that we see going forward, where the first stage is to replace the fertilizer component and then make fuels. So some of those other things like methanol or DME. And another way to look at it is that we call it Project Cornucopia. And it's basically maximizing the potential off of every acre, the 3 Fs, food, fertilizer, and fuel. So, and we're playing in every one of these areas. It's one of those fortunate opportunities that we can. Now, just very quickly, some of the challenges. So the unique proposition. The challenge you run into is that for those who've tried to raise money from venture capital, if you walk in with a unique proposition, it might be the greatest thing that your VC friend has ever heard, but they don't have time. They get 3,000 business plans a year. They can say yes to 2, 3, or 5, and so they're good at saying no. Doesn't matter what it is, they're just good at saying no. So if they don't have the time to really investigate this market and they don't come from a farm, you're not going to get any money. So that's one of the challenges that we run into in raising capital. Also, we're at the point where we're sort of between the early stage and the first commercial and that typical valley of death, and these are big, expensive projects, really more project equity finance approach. Last year has been a very difficult time to raise money, and so this was one of the challenges. This is where loan guarantee programs from the government have come into play and been very, very important and helpful. I used to be a software guy, so gee, he's a software guy. What's he doing in biofuels? But what I learned along the way is that when Jack Welch took over GE, he didn't know every part of their business. And not that I think that I'm Jack Welch, but after a while, you do learn how to run a company and build startups. And those qualities, I think, are more important when starting a new venture than necessarily the specific expertise in the business, as long as you know, what you don't know, and you bring in all the right people. Feedstock supply. This is the most important thing in a biofuels industry. If you can't get feedstock, you can't get financing, you can't run your business. So you got to think about that primarily in whatever it is that your process is, where it's located, how you get those, and not just some startup guy that gets you the feedstock from a reliable source. And then politics. In software, never had to actually talk to anybody in Washington or here in the state or anywhere. But in this industry, you absolutely have to. You have to make sure that you're doing it, that you're engaged, and engage with people who are doing it for you. And so, I always liked this movie, and so I've modified it slightly to be the ammonia story. So it's our energy independence and beyond. So thanks a lot.
We're going to do this in order, so I think I'm going to have come up here. And this is an interesting. Leandro, you're from Argentina, is that correct? Oh, interesting. And my wife is from Argentina, so we'll have a nice chat afterwards. So, wonderful feedstock country.
And meat.
Oh, we're all gonna come up.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm going to introduce the show.
Okay. Get the show on the road. Okay, so why don't we? I'm sorry. We'll do that. Eric, why don't we start with you because you're right there. Just a quick word about Eric McAfee and AE Biofuels, just really quickly, and he'll do the rest of the introduction himself. AE is one of the most interesting companies. Eric, of course, unbeknownst to many of you, perhaps, was an early shareholder and early founder of Pacific Ethanol. So he was a major player in early stage ethanol infrastructure in this country. He's one of the ones that really had vision on the early end to see that, as often has been talked about in this country, that you could take the first generation ethanol and use that as a platform for advanced biofuels. And there are a few companies in this country that are really practicing that message, which has been repeated, many times in many places. And I think you're about to hear from one of the most exciting plays, because actually you're making it happen there by actually literally taking a first generation ethanol plant and turning it into an advanced bioenergy factory, and so it's sort of silly on to AE. So I'm actually fascinated to hear the story, because much talked about, but we actually haven't had too many people to actually talk about the reality of what that means and how it works. Eric.
I founded 7 public companies and funded about 25 as a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, and I think energy has treated me very well over the last 10 years because it's actually a real market. It's not measured by eyeballs or site visits. It's actually measured by revenue and cash flow. And we have Chevron up here today, and we have them to thank, actually, for being a dinosaur in this industry and leading the way for the rest of us. He's a friend of mine. But I can say with a lot of encouragement to every one of you, there are about 180 existing corn ethanol plants in the United States built for about $24 billion of capital expenditures. And Wall Street pretty much threw them out with the bathwater in July and August of 2006, when the price of corn tripled and the price of ethanol fell by 50% in 60 days. Several billion dollars of hot IPO money went up in flames, and a really big IPO that was planned for August went also up in flames and lost about $1 billion. And for those with long memories, will actually remember 2006 as when biofuels really stumbled badly. Now, that is a huge opportunity for everybody in this room, because Wall Street backed away from what was, as you can see from all the graphs here, an enormous growth industry measured by revenues and cash flow. And so what we've done at AE Biofuels is very simple. We took a technology originally funded by the Department of Energy, commercialized in the 80s and 90s, and we are converting a real cellulosic ethanol plant from a corn plant. It was built originally by Richard Branson and Vinod Khosla and CalPERS and some other guys that threw in $200 million back in 2006. And we're using our technology to convert that to roughly 25% cellulosic ethanol and about 75% regular old corn ethanol. We'll talk later in the session why we think that is really Biofuels 2.0, which is taking 1.0 and using it as the platform to make 3 or 4 billion gallons of regular old cellulosic ethanol mandated in the United States. Already has a real market, started January 2010, but without building any facilities at all, just converting existing facilities. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Eric. Leandro is representing Green Pacific Biologicals. This is an early stage algae venture, and one that I am just starting to follow here on the digest, so I'm dying to hear what's happening. Many of you have heard about the excitement in algae. Just today was announced by DARPA, fuel we'll never see because it's DARPA, it's the military, that they've achieved $2 a gallon fuel from algae, 2 different teams. So they're actually at parity with gasoline. Like I say, we'll never see the fuel because it'll all be soaked up by our friends in Washington, but an amazing achievement, and it just shows the promise that I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, probably the audience haven't heard too much about us. We are a new company, and we've been very focused in our lab work. We have a focus on genetic engineering of eukaryotic algae. So we're trying to bring genetic engineering and synthetic biology to address the cost issues currently in algae biofuels. We're trying to take also a different model after learning from Biofuels 1.0. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but in essence, we're trying to avoid large capital expenses, and we're trying to minimize the investments for to reach value inflection points. I can go into details later how we think we can do that.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Paul Bryan, representing Chevron, and probably a company that needs, for many of you, probably think you know it very well, but we're going to hear about the bioenergy side of it, which is actually a really, really exciting side. It's a company that has, you wouldn't know how much that company stood for change over the years, and I think this is a new area of emerging opportunity. So, Paul?
Yeah, when Sandor invited me to take part in this panel, he assured me that the audience would not be hostile. He didn't say anything about my fellow panelists. But Eric's right. We were good friends, and I'm going to miss him. I'd actually like to, in my introductory comment, point to a great slide that our moderator put up. I had never seen it before, and I think there are two messages in there that are very important, one of which he mentioned, and the other one of which I'd like to mention too. And that was the circle about all of the biomass potential in the world and how much of it is unused. And that's the message that came through. The potential is incredible. But think about the two slices that were there. The slice for primary energy was 2,000 times the slice for food. Humanity has been working for a long time to grow food as efficiently as we can and to feed 6 or 7 billion people on the planet, and yet it's 1/2000th of the energy market. If we're not careful here, the energy market can swallow food indefinitely and not even get indigestion. So the message I want to get across is the scale of the energy business is incredible, and we really have to focus on that untapped potential, not digging into the precious food resources which themselves need to be expanded.
It's amazing to get a sustainability message from Chevron. If that doesn't tell you that we're in a new world, that is just it. Our last one, David Barry, is just I want to say a word because he probably won't say this about himself, but in our 50 hottest companies of bioenergy, I think there's only 3 people in the world that actually co-founded 2 of them, and David's one of them, LS9. And what was the other one that was on? And no,
Joule?
Joule, of course. I'm sorry, Joule, number 26. Joule, you never hear about Joule. It's like the mystery company. They make fuel from thin air. Somewhere in Texas, they won't tell you where. So anyway, David.
Well, we'd tell you, but we'd have to kill everyone in here. So that's not going to happen. So I'm David Barry. I'm a partner at Flagship Ventures, which means I'm a venture capitalist, AKA scum of the earth, but I guess tonight algae is a good thing. Our business is twofold. One, we invest in companies. We look for things that we think have the potential to change the world. But two, a big part of what we do, and this is sort of an unheralded portion of venture capital, frankly, because I can think of maybe 2 firms in the world that do this, is we base a lot of what we do on inventing our own technologies and founding our own companies. And the way that we do that is we try to ask very big questions and come up with very big solutions. And it's because we're given that privilege of, well, we have the money that we're going to invest in our own company, and we have the capabilities based on our network and ourselves to invent these technologies and the wherewithal to try to go for that. That's led to LS9, it's led to Joule. It's very interesting to hear about this food problem because we'll be announcing a company not too long that's going after that. And exactly in the way that we're talking about here, if you take some of the styles of innovation, you can actually feed about 150 billion people using synthetic biology type technologies for the same amount of energy that it would take to go after the world's energy problem. Given that we're only looking at about 9 billion people in 2050, seems like a very tangible problem compared to everything else we're talking about. So definitely a lot of opportunities here. Happy to talk about any of the companies as we go on with the night.
Well, this is the fun part of the evening is when we get into the hard questions of actually the mechanics of how do we create value. We've talked about large opportunities. We've raised a couple of I think, interesting questions. The first question I'd like to ask, throw to the panel, and I'll take it from anyone who probably does not make their own feedstock, and that is, what are the mechanics by which, and I'll put this as a 2-part question. First of all, how do you expect to secure your feedstock to get yourself to commercialization? That's the easy part. And the harder part is, how do you expect to compete for feedstock successfully when there are hundreds of bioenergy plants and also many other calls on biomass for power, biomass for food, biomass for others? How do you expect to compete and maintain your competitive advantage?
Since I'm
Eric?
the guy that's saying we're going to use existing plants, that's an excellent question. The energy world is largely an oligopoly when your feedstock is so light that you don't want to transport it. If anybody owns a pickup truck here, imagine taking a straw bale, sticking it back of a pickup truck, and then driving it 1,500 miles from Nebraska to California to convert it into fuel. You'd probably realize that that's not a very supportable business model. So you have a oligopoly in that whoever's close to the business, the biomass production has a natural logistics advantage against anybody else. So in our model, that is actually the key, which is an existing ethanol plant is already built next to usually the feedstock that feeds it. And so there's approximately a 5/6 biomass to food ratio in what you're growing in a field, and you're wasting the the 5 parts and you're using 1/6. So our sustainable business model is somebody's going to build 180 of them. Somebody already did. All they need is the technology now to be able to convert the cellulosic component of what they're already growing. It doesn't take any more water, land, or fertilizer to build the waste that's already there. What you need is the technology. So that's what we focused on.
So I'll dive in on that too. So there are a couple of things that are important. The first thing is that although all that biomass exists, it's not being collected today in any rational, efficient manner. So the challenge is, how do you provide the incentive? How do you actually create the target for people to want to collect it and deliver it because they can make money doing it, and at the same time get a project finance? So being able to get one off the ground off of an existing facility is one model. But even then, it's a risk, because if you don't have your feedstock supply locked up before if you have to put any reasonable financing into it, doing typical project finance is virtually impossible. The other thing that's important, and we've spent a lot of time with folks at Iowa State and other universities and USDA, looking at how much of that 5/6 can you really take off the soil and make sure that it maintains its health over the long haul, so that, as I mentioned before, there's some people who bring up the question that you're coming here, if you mine our soil for 20 years, maybe you can get by with that, but then the soil is depleted because you took all the biomass off of it. And so that's one of the really critical things, is that there's a lot of biomass, but there's only still a small portion of it that's available, and doing that efficiently is pretty important. There are some better ways than others, but it depends on the feedstock supply.
We're starting to get a couple of good questions, I think, or a sea of questions. If you have a question, just fill out your yellow card and just make sure you pass it in, because we're starting to get a few. And I'd like to make sure your question gets in.
There's one thing I wanted to add, forgot,
Okay.
is that we're also looking at co-locating or locating next to existing facilities that already process food that have biomass outputs that already have some value, but maybe is more valuable to us, so we can pay a little extra for it, and they find that attractive, and then we can lock in a long-term feedstock supply contract.
While we're evaluating the questions that are coming in from the audience, one other question I'd like to throw out, which has to do with policy stability. We are in an industry where you're going to be building out your technologies over 5, 6, 8, 10 years, maybe more, especially if you're looking at the commercialization phase. Typically, we're looking at regime change in Washington, also at the state level, also at the county level. There's lots of, the hand of government is extremely important from a finance, from a policy point of view. How do you, as an entrepreneur, face the task of guiding your company through the potential of turbulent times in policy, where you have, where you find yourself on the winning technology one day, potentially the losing technology tomorrow?
Can I answer that first, even though I'm hogging this?
Sure.
You get Jerry Moran to run for the U.S. Senate, and you get him elected. The only way to be consistent is to make sure your politicians are consistent, and make sure that you get politicians that know what they're talking about. For any of you who have been in software or technology, where I spent the first 20 years of my career, we don't care about politics. We don't even know that Washington, D.C. exists. Until Bill Gates got sued, we really didn't care. This is a completely different world. The people that are inside the Beltway in Washington run this industry. Their whims and their desires are your life determinants of your success of your company, and you have to treat them like partners, and you have to support them. You have to understand their careers and their ambitions and their capabilities. And if that's not what you're spending your time thinking about, then you're not in the biofuels industry. You're still stuck in software, just making something different. And I hate to be harsh about it, but that's the reality of our world. And I would encourage Silicon Valley to wake up and start getting active in supporting politicians all across the United States who do have an understanding of this great business opportunity and need our support and our leadership and our input so they can be effective at their jobs.
I'll add a comment also. I don't think Chevron qualifies as entrepreneur, but we're very interested in only investing in things that are going to make sense for the long run. So I think the key is to look at things that make techno-economic sense, that make environmental sense, that make social sense. You don't depend on subsidies. You take them if they're there, like everybody does, but don't make your business depend on them, and hope and lobby for stability. The government is going to do the will of the people, and we have to respond to whatever that is. But the stability is necessary because of the scale of investments that are required. But my message to the entrepreneur is, do not put yourself in a niche that depends on a particular party being in power or a particular subsidy enduring or something like that. It needs to be a technically, economically, environmentally, and socially good approach for the long run.
I do want to add one thing to what Paul said, and I completely agree. When we look for companies that we're going to invest in, the competitive price that we think about is entirely unsubsidized. Washington has historically been in these areas completely unpredictable. We don't know where it's going to be going. We've been waiting for 5 years, by some accounts a lot longer, for carbon taxes or cap and trade, and we still have no predictability on that. And Silicon Valley is still waiting to figure out how they're going to be playing those sorts of investments. The other thing we have to remember on this, though, is if we're making biofuels or whatever other type of fuel we want to call it, they're fungible products at the end of the day. And not only are they sold in the US, but they're sold up and down North America, they're sold in China, they're sold in Russia, and we only constitute 25% of that market. And one of the things that we like to also remind on the other side, remind Washington, is that if the US isn't thinking aggressively about its strategy going forward and how it's going to be independent from foreign oil in the future, well, frankly, a lot of these technologies, as they already have, are going to continue migrating over to China, Europe, et cetera. So it's something that, frankly, our countries aren't just thinking domestically, they're thinking internationally, because we are building fungible products.
Very shortly, I'm glad to hear that and they don't want entrepreneurs that depend on subsidies. Always ask yourself the question that, how much I am saving in cost in the production process. So that's what we've been following. I also wanted to add that as entrepreneurs, and due to the long development timelines that are needed for bio and biotechnology projects, it would be good to get some stable signals from the Congress, whatever that signal is, but know that that's going to remain that way for a certain period of time. That's going to help us a lot.
And I'll add to that in addition, and I agree with everything these guys have said, it's exactly right on. But there's one additional thing, and although it may seem like banging one's head against the wall, educating our representatives so that they understand that a price on carbon actually drives opportunity in our markets to further develop these technologies, to make sure that the market really needs to buy them and just will absorb them as quickly as we can build them, will be the fastest way for us to actually build economic growth in the country, and to not be afraid of it. That there might be a short-term area of pain potentially, and I don't actually see that being that bad, because we can manage that. But if we can actually get a price on carbon in our system, we will get to our goals as quickly as possible.
We're going to turn to some.
It might sound that way, but in the end of the day, I got into this not to make money, but the business has to make money. I got into this because we need to solve this energy problem, and it is the best way forward, is to provide a consistent system that creates the demand for our products that will allow capital to flow. At this point, we have hundreds of companies with technologies that can contribute significantly to our transition, but the capital isn't flowing because there's concern about, well, gee, can they compete? What's happening with the market, et cetera, et cetera. And and at the same time, it's a problem we need to solve. Climate change is real; it's happening. If we don't actually do something about it, what's the point?
Here's a question from the audience. It's actually a good one. This is one for Leandro. This is for you. How do you think environmentalists view genetically modified algae? Where does GMO fit in the algae equation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Other products have faced those challenges. There are genetically modified products out there in the environment, and it will require some consensus with the environmentalist community. We will also need a regulatory framework and there are the specific studies that need to be done to assure both the authorities and the community that it's safe for what we're doing. At the end of the day, each community has the power to decide if they want to go ahead with a solution like this or not. Like it happened with GM plants, for example. Some countries have adopted that aggressively and have brought enormous benefits to those communities, and others have decided not to go that way. I'm sure that it's going to be a lot of people interested in GM algae that can produce fuels at a commercially competitive price.
I'll add one thing to that, if I may. We have probably 9 companies dealing with what we like to call synthetic biotechnology, and the reason we use that term as opposed to synthetic biology is, well, synthetic biology feels like you're making life. Synthetic biotechnology is a tool, and it's a very important distinction. Companies like LS9, Mascoma, Joule all use this platform very aggressively, and it's something that we've integrated systematically into our thinking of working with environmentalists, working with NGOs to make sure that these issues are addressed. They're relatively straightforward as to what people are concerned about. They're concerned about things like antibiotic resistance getting out there. These are real issues. They're things that have to be dealt with, but there's mechanisms that are in place for this. And what we've seen time and time and time again is every single NGO we've dealt with has felt that if we can actually offer a real-world solution to whether it's cancer or whether it's the fuel problem, so long as we're being responsible about dealing with genetically modified organisms in some way or another, they're very in support of that.
Just a quick program, and it just occurred to me when you mentioned Mascoma. Those of you that are following the Olympics this week, Mascoma is an early-stage ethanol company. Executive Vice President, Acting President Jim Flatt, his daughter Rachel Flatt is representing the United States in figure skating this week. So bioenergy there, you know, at the games. We're responsible. Yeah. Anyway, we wish her well. And here's a question for, let's see. Let's take, Eric, if you could take this one. If cellulose is removed from the food agriculture system for fuel, how will soil quality be sustained?
Following up on the comment here, University of Nebraska did a 5-year study, showed if you took the top third of a corn stalk, which is a corn cob and the top chunk of the corn stover, you'd have no impact at all on the soil amendments, and you wouldn't increase nitrogen injection, et cetera, which is actually what the math is. You could do about 2 billion gallons a year of cellulosic ethanol in the U.S. through existing corn ethanol plants, just using, frankly, our technology, I'd prefer. And you wouldn't have any impact on the soil quality or needing any additional nitrogen.
Here's a question for Paul. Maybe you can take this one because it has to do with transportation of new fuels and pipelines and things like that. It says here, transportation of new fuel seems to be the bottleneck. What can a new company do to overcome this? What do you see as the future of fuel transportation?
The short answer is make old fuels. And I'm being slightly facetious, but I'm also being honest. A lot of the new approaches in biofuels do not make ethanol. They don't make biodiesel. They make hydrocarbons. They're just biologically derived rather than being fossil fuels. So if you look at some of the work in synthetic biology that's going on, right here in the Bay Area, we have 3 of the leaders in that field, Solazyme, LS9, and Amyris. They're all engineering microbes to eat sugar and make oil. They use different microbes, they make different products by different technologies. And the sugar, of course, can come from conventional sources like corn or sugar cane today, but in the future, cellulosic sugar can be the feedstock. In addition to that, there are the so-called thermochemical technologies. Pyrolysis technologies convert biomass to a liquid that can be upgraded into hydrocarbon fuels. The technology that we heard about today, gasification, can be the front end to making ammonia, but it can also be the front end to making alcohols or diesel fuel of a hydrocarbon nature. So in the long run, we have a huge investment, trillions of dollars globally, in the cars that are on the road today and in the pipelines that carry the fuels around So there's no reason we can't take biomass and make fuels like that will be compatible with the infrastructure we have today.
Question for Dave. Would you fund biofuel startups outside of the United States?
Well, it's a two-part answer to that. First is we are looking for breakthrough technologies in whatever sector it happens to be in whatever location it happens to be in. First and foremost, we're looking to invest in game-changing technologies. Now, our natural bias is we like to do things that are closer to home because we're very active investors. And so whether it's hopping on a plane for 6 hours to San Francisco or 6 hours to London or France, it's about the same thing, except that France has better food. But we do have to think about where we're interacting, because the policy in other countries is quite different than what it is in the U.S. And every time we want to make an investment outside of the U.S., we have to make sure we're dealing with it in the context of that locale. So while the short answer is yes, the longer answer is it's complicated.
I would like to add something to that. We are actually doing part of our work in another country. So I urge entrepreneurs to consider that idea. We would like to keep that work here, but we need to. We are capitalists. We need to get our work going forward. So you should consider that. At the same time, we have foreign investors as well. This is the other side of the question. If a local investor would go out, but we accepted investment from a foreign fund, and I urge you to explore those possibilities as well. Local investors, maybe you can give your opinion as well, David, are a little hesitant these days, are a little confused about the conditions, and which is understandable. And some foreign investors are very aggressive, and
I think hesitant and confused is a great description of Wall Street. Also be appropriate for Washington, D.C. I wanted to mention, though, that when we built our biofuels company, it was actually our second company. The first one became worth about $1.8 billion in 2006. Bill Gates put $84 million of his money in the thing, and it was very successful. Raised $250 million of equity, most at $1 billion valuation, and I founded it with a politician back in 2003. So this was our second go, and we didn't build our first plant in the United States. We actually built the largest biofuels plant in the country of India, largest domesticated plant, because India had a fixed price of diesel. It's set by the government. It was close to the world's largest supply of the cheapest feedstock available, which is palm oil that comes from Indonesia and Malaysia. And it has a domestic market of over 400 pharmaceutical companies that need a product called refined glycerin that is 10% of the production of a biofuels plant. So we took the globe, we spun it a couple times, we came up with India, and we built a 50 million gallon plant there, but also in India is a booming economy and a booming stock market. So we are in a position of being able to do an IPO, for example, of a subsidiary that is at a valuation that would just have an extra 0 or maybe even 2 compared to the largely non-existent IPO here in the US. We built that first because this year that's a $50 million revenue, maybe even $100 million of revenue for us before having anything at all, not even a drop of cellulosic ethanol. And that's the secret, guys, is build a real business first and then go fantasize and get your white coat on and your glasses and your little clipboard and go do a bunch of research. If you want to raise money in this environment, you got to be a business. Otherwise, your flagship venture is going to be running your company because they're going to own your company because that's all. We're the only place the money's going to come from.
Well, and I'll just add to that. We really don't want to be running someone else's company. Because our business is either investing or founding in companies and having them run themselves and making ideally good exits for us. So as we think about these things, we are looking for sustainable management teams, whether they're here or abroad, that can deal with not just the company in its locale, but that company in the world, and making sure that it can make an impact on its own.
Jack, I'm going to ask you to take this question. This is a toughie, so I apologize in advance, but it's actually a really good question. Whoever asked this, I thank you for bringing this up. The question is, water is conspicuously absent from the discussion. I haven't gotten into water. It's actually a really, really big topic. It's a good question. Where is the water going to come from to grow all this feedstock?
Well, next question.
Well, with climate change, the water is just going to move to different places. We'll chase it. No, actually, in the Midwest, where we're using crop residue, it's already growing. So, in most places, it's dry farming. It's natural rainfall that grows the crops. The issue is less so much growing the feedstock than it is how much water is used in the process to create the fuels. And this is one of the challenges with today's, version 1.0 of ethanol. It's not particularly water effective. However, new generations, all the new things that are happening, it's been designed in to be more water efficient or recycle the water to be able to reuse it so that we're wasting relatively little, or getting to what are known as continuous processes. So you're cleaning up the water and just adding a little bit to it as you go on. So you take the water usage today, which is 1 million gallons a day, and dropping it by a fraction of that. In our particular case, water is a pretty important part of the gasification process. A lot of the hydrogen that we're making comes out of water. Some of that's already in the biomass because it already collects water from the environment. But in terms of volume, we're talking about the equivalent of a couple of cul-de-sacs in a typical neighborhood in terms of the volume that we use. So it's not substantial. But that is a hallmark of everything going forward, because everybody realizes that to build a sustainable business, one of your inputs is going to be water. If you can't get it, or you can't get very much of it, and you need it, you're not going to have a sustainable business. So everybody is looking at that in mind in terms of game-changing technologies as we've been discussing. It's all part of version 2 and beyond. It has to be.
Here's a question for Landra, and this is regarding the algae timelines. How long is the investment horizon from lab to industrial scale and becoming economically self-sustaining without subsidization? How long does it take?
I don't know. Nobody has done it. The timeline has changed from 5 years to 10 years, and it is shifting. We want to actually stay away from that. That's one of the reasons why we adopted a little different model. We want to stay away from the production phases and commercialization. And there are very good companies out there that are working on that. So we want to stay away from that uncertainty. We think we can still capture some good value with our solutions for those companies. But honestly, trying to answer that question, easily 10 years, I guess.
Well, I'll just add a historic.
Interrupt and answer that question. Shortly, very short, I promise.
Sure.
First of all, I say, at this stage of the game, water is no problem because producing algae does not require fresh, drinkable water.
Correct.
Okay? That is well known. Secondly, right now, if you try to produce algae, compete with petroleum, you're going to lose your shirt. I don't care who says what. Only if you sell your algae a couple of times. First time, you sell it to the cities to clean up their wastewater. We are now in the process of doing that. We have been given money to do, well, I don't want to get into commercials. That can be done. So if you do that, you can sell the fertilizers, the nitrogen, and so on and so forth, because they are fertilizers, to the cities because that's what dirties your water. You take that, and there are cities. If you want, I can give you a name, and so on and so forth. And then you sell that to refining companies. One of the third largest refining oil refining company is working with us. So I say these are no problem. I think in 3 to 5 years.
Well, I think
if you do that,
the point is well taken. I think that wastewater remediation is a strategy for algae. Algae does clean up water. So that's probably one thing. Just to put a historic metric on for the person that asked the question, The two DARPA teams went from $32 algae to $2 algae in 18 months.
Yeah, quick reply. I was answering regarding biofuels from algae, and also in terms of scale that can have an impact in the market.
There's a question for, let's see, let's see, who's going to take this one? This has to do with I'll take a volunteer on this one. President Obama's Biofuels Interagency Working Group just published Growing America's Fuel. Did you all read it, or did any of you read it? It was a really nice piece of government work. It was 15 pages. God bless them. You know, if you read the healthcare bill, which had stuff, I had to read the healthcare bill, and it was endless. 1,200 pages of madness. Anyway, they pointed out there's a shortfall of in 2010 in the biofuel target. Basically, what they said is they're bringing down the cellulosic ethanol target from 100 million gallons. And they pointed out that rather than a technology roadblock, it was a funding issue. How much of a roadblock currently is funding versus the technology? Where is that? Do I take a volunteer?
Without any funding, there is no technology. And I think that's pretty obvious out here where you're trying to get things done. Not so obvious inside the Beltway, because interestingly enough, inside the Beltway, they've got plenty of cash and they can't understand why we aren't hurrying up and spending it. I've sat inside the Department of Energy with the head of the biomass group and their top technologists for an hour and a half, asking them what it was they were interested in funding relative to taking existing production facilities that are generating virtually 100% of all the biofuels in America, today 12 billion gallons of it, and what amount of either loan guarantees or grants they could support out of their $125 billion legislative allocation. And after an hour and a half, I got the answer 3 times, so I can assure you it's true. They said 0, 0, and 0. If you say starch or corn in your application, we will give you 0 money. At the end of it, they said, you have a very impressive technology. If you have something that's not commercial and takes 3 to 5 years to develop, we will fund you. But you better not say corn or starch in your application. Say it's for cellulosic ethanol. Congress has done a great job. Mr. Moran was a key part of this, by the way. It legislated a ton of money over the Department of Energy, some support for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The agencies are friggin' incompetent about deploying capital in commercial allocations, and so they've put together a wonderful structure. And that structure is have everybody come together, apply, and then we'll read everybody's stuff. 6 months or so later, we'll tell them who's a finalist. We'll spend another 6 months deciding among the finalists who the winners are. We'll spend another 6 months to a year doing paperwork on the winners. Then we'll figure out that they actually need debt to really build anything. So we'll call up a commercial bank and ask them, would you like to fund this company? We just gave them $100 million. Without the debt, you don't get a facility. That goofball game has been going on since 2006. And I feel sorry for our congressmen because they come home and everybody laughs at them and says, what kind of a game are you playing? Because the agencies are not delivering. I would love to ask Mr. Obama, if you guys are friends with him or tweet to him or something, ask him how many times he's walked himself over to the Department of Energy, sat down with the head of the loan guarantee department. How many times he has asked that guy to give him a monthly report of the actual dollars deployed. I bet he's never even met the guy. This is the future of alternative energy in America, and our president hasn't even walked his tail over there and sat down with the dude and asked him to deliver. That's how easy it is to run this government, and we're not doing it. We're not doing it. Now, why is it we're not doing it? It's because we're sitting out here talking about it at Stanford rather than doing it in Washington, D.C. And the people that do it are sitting right over here. This guy is a guy that can have a staff, call the Department of Energy and says, hey, I got a project. Are you guys working on it? That's the way you make our industry run. And I wish we were more serious about it. We play too many games writing papers and talking to each other and not focusing enough on the guys who really have capital, which are not in Wall Street. It's inside the Beltway. And we need to get real serious together about calling our congressmen and asking them to deliver real dollars to fund what is the future of America.
I want to add a couple of extra pieces to that. And that same program that Eric was just talking about, out of about almost $500 million, 75 million of it went to non-U.S. companies for the Recovery Act, which was also something that I thought was politically just about as stupid as you can get. Not only, I think just wrong for given the intent. But the other problem is that the current administration, even though I was all excited about having to come in, is also trying to do what they call transparent, non-transparent government, which means you can't find out who any of the reviewers were. They won't tell you anything about the process. Everything's in the dark. And your Congress people cannot call them and actually get anything done, because if it's associated with giving out money, they don't want any influence. So it's a completely covert game, and it's absolutely one of the worst things that's happening right now. And I've been encouraging our Congress people to not give DOE any more money because they're not spending it well.
There's going to time for just one last question, and I'm going to ask this one for anyone who wants to jump in, but specifically Dave and Paul. What's the outlook for green crude production? I assume we mean drop-in fuels. The question asks for what are the approaches, what are the costs, who are the key players, what's the outlook for drop-in fuels?
Well, I guess I'll respond to that first, since we're in an industry where the drop-in fuels are what we make today, and we see the advantages of them, things like energy density, an infrastructure that's built to handle them, engines that are built to use them. It's just a question of changing the source from fossil to renewable. And as I mentioned, I think synthetic biology approaches, there are a number of companies. I mentioned 3 in the Bay Area, since that's where we're based, and that's where you are all, at least this evening. There's some really fantastic work going on at all of those 3 companies, but they're by no means the only ones. And I think, again, as I mentioned, the thermochemical routes should not be ignored. The biological routes are great, but biological processes tend to be rather slow compared to processes that take place at very elevated temperatures. So I think the thermochemical routes need to be looked at as well. And I mentioned pyrolysis and gasification among those. So I think there are a lot of ways that we can get from renewable resources of all sorts, whether it's sugar or lignin or lignocellulosic biomass or lipids. There are a lot of ways we can get from those to fuels that work perfectly well in today's cars and petroleum infrastructure.
Yeah. Part of the question, I think, is a definitional one, which is green crude has been used for a whole series of things. The way I like to think of green crude is something that looks like what you would get out of an algal membrane, which is more of an ester in its in the way that it's structured. And the market in my mind for that as green crude is pretty small. We are not big advocates of biodiesel in the traditional means of an alkyl ester or something along those lines. Now, what Paul was getting at was this some of the lipid-based type technologies where you can actually have straight chain alkanes, like what we actually put into our tanks today, like what we put in our pipelines today, and that diesel market is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $600 billion today. So that's why we've been investing very heavily in technologies that can go after that. We see tremendous market opportunities there. When you can have a fungible product at a lower cost that can deal within a distribution channel that already exists, the sky's the limit. And as we know, our reserves are questionable in terms of where they're going to come from in the future. So if we can put a plant up in Iowa or Arizona or wherever that happens to be domestically and know that our reserves are going to be domestic and low cost and predictable, I think our domestic oil industry would be quite happy to help us distribute that. So we see that as really where the future is. There's a number of other molecules that I think also can fall into that same category. But at the end of the day, it's fungible products that I think are going to make a big difference.
Well, we didn't have time to take a lot of really good questions. I got a whole stack of them. So if your question wasn't asked, please come up afterwards and find our panelists. In the meantime, I'll turn it back to Hiroshi with thank you to all the panelists.